So, you've decided to build a new WordPress product, but how will you fund its development? Is it best for the short and long term health of your business if you bootstrap and build it through your own resources? Or is it better to seek funding and investment from a third party? But are there any other options? That's what we're going to talk about today.
This is WP Product Talk, a place where every week we bring you insights in product marketing, business management and growth, customer experience, product development, and more. It's your go-to podcast for WordPress product owners by WordPress product owners. And now, enjoy the show.
Hi, welcome to WP Product Talk. I'm Katie Keith, founder and CEO at Barn2 Plugins.
And I'm Amber Hinds, CEO of Equalize Digital.
And today we're talking about an important topic that affects everyone who is planning to build a WordPress product, how to fund it. Now, this is the second episode of a new season of WP Product Talk, in which we're going through every stage of building a new product step by step. So last week we talked about how to choose which product to build, and now we need to consider the options for funding it.
And that is why we are excited to have our guest here today, Marieke van der Rakt. Hey, Marieke.
Hey, nice to be here.
Hey.
We are very excited to have you here to talk all about funding WordPress product development. Can you give a little introduction to yourself and your background?
Yes, of course. So my name is Marieke van der Rakt, which is Dutch. That's why I pronounce it slightly different, but I thought you did a really good job, Amber. I am currently the co-owner of Emilia Capital, which is an investment company, and we have invested in multiple WordPress brands. Among others, we invested in Equalize Digital, but also in Aterim and in Costos, and we have invested previously in Strateq. I'm forgetting some, but there Extendify is one of them. So multiple WordPress brands. And before I was doing that, I was the co-founder and the CEO of Yoast, which is most famous for the Yoast SEO plugin. That's about it, I think. And we're now currently also developing a new product because that's fun to do. So that's also what I'm doing.
Yeah, and it's looking fantastic, Progress Planner. Yeah.
Thank you. We're having a lot of fun, but it's work in progress still, which is fun because it's called Progress Planner. So we have a lot to do.
Yeah, well, I hope you're using Progress Planner to plan the content of your Progress Planner website.
We do. Yes. Yes. Yeah.
So the topic for today is funding. So could you talk a bit about why you think this is such an important issue, which kind of makes or breaks a new WordPress product?
Yeah. So Yoast never had any funding. We were totally bootstrapped. And I still think that products could grow in such a way in the current WordPress ecosystem, but it has become harder because we were not the only SEO plugin out there, but one of the few, and it was much easier to get views on your socials or on your blog post. I know that when I did a post on Facebook in the beginning, I had like 10,000 views. I never have that anymore. It's like unbelievably. So it's very different now than it was when we first started out. So I think not in all cases, but in some cases, it can be very beneficial that you start out with kind of a budget. Also because it will help you to stay focused on your product, because if you're bootstrapped, you have to do something in the early days to get money from. So that means either have a part-time job on the side or do something else for yourself, which can make it harder, not impossible, to start a business. So funding could really give you that a spinning wheel, is that called? I don't know. But to get started and to get to a product that really drives market or has enough traction to get us to a sustainable level of profit.
Yeah. I think too, a lot of product owners maybe don't think about this initially. And that's why I think this episode is probably really important for us, because a lot of us created products while we were doing agency work, building websites for clients. And so our default is just, oh, we'll work on it around our client work. But if you have a product-centered goal to be more product-centric, or maybe even product first with your company, then I think it's really important to think about funding sources early on, because that is going to shape a lot of the direction in what you decide to build, how quickly you can build things, and sort of what those longer term goals might be, or the direction for your product. And so really, I'd advise people to think about it earlier rather than later.
Yeah. There
Yeah,
are
good
downsides
advice.
as well.
Yeah, well, we'll get to those and the different options. So I think before we get too much into the discussion, it's worth going through a few definitions. We don't normally do this, but people throw terms around like bootstrapping. In fact, Robert's added a comment, dog fooding your product is A+. I don't actually know what that means. Zach has randomly said flywheel.
That means
Dog fooding your product
dog fooding. Go for it, Marieke.
I think it means that you use your own product so that you also know what kind of new features you have to build. So that I think that's dog fooding, but I'm not native English.
Yes, that's what that means.
Yeah.
It's eating your own stuff.
Yeah.
How does that differ from
I think that was a
Bootstrap?
response to the comment that Progress Planner is using Progress Planner to build Progress Planner.
Yes.
Yes.
And I really believe in that, because I think at Yoast, we were also always busy with our own product. So I was using Yoast SEO every day, and that helps you to get frustrated because if something doesn't work, and come up with new ideas on how to improve that. So
yeah,
we called it at Yoast ensuring quality by being your own customer.
Yeah. Scratch your own itch as well, I suppose.
Yes.
It's referred to. Yeah.
So do we want to go around and kind of talk about, I know you listed out on our show notes for us, Katie, some of the different terms you think we want to make sure the audience understands. Marieke, you mentioned bootstrapping. Do you want to define bootstrapping for people if they've never heard that term before?
I didn't know what it was for a really long time. Bootstrapping just means that you grow with your own money. So you grow gradually, and you sell some products, and then with the money you make from those products, you'll grow further. So you'll invest the money that you make, and then you'll have a gradual growing curve. Yeah, you can have a fast growing curve as well. At Yoast, we had a pretty fast, steep line, but still we were only bootstrapped. So there's no other money than your own. That also means that you are 100% owner of your company. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I always thought that bootstrapping meant you were on a tiny budget. I'm not sure why. It just raised images in my mind of like Victorian boots that you have to keep going forever or something weird. I don't know. It's actually about pulling you up by your own bootstraps or something, isn't it? But I just thought it meant you had like no money at all and you couldn't really invest much with your own money.
Which is the
case. In the beginning.
It may well be the case, but it doesn't have to be. It just means you haven't got outside funding, doesn't it?
Yes.
Mm-hmm. So the next one that we have listed is, go ahead, loans and traditional financing. Do you want to talk about that, Katie?
I've never actually heard of a WordPress product doing it, but it is a very... Have you? You got a loan? Oh, you do it then.
Oh, yeah. Okay. So, I mean, this is jumping a little bit ahead to story time, but yes, we have done both. So in 2019, we were building just websites. We were a marketing agency. We did like SEO and social media and all this stuff. And we knew we wanted to build a WordPress plugin that we wanted to sell. And we were looking at our revenue and our expenses, and we knew we didn't have the capital to really say we're going to work hard dedicating our entire team to designing and coding a product building a website to promote that, right? Like we had to be the customer. So we sat down and we looked at how much money would we need for our team to build this thing. And we ended up taking out a small business administration loan. So that's like a government backed low. At the time, it was low interest. We'll talk about variable interest rates later, probably. But it was a very low interest rate at the time, government backed loan. We took out $120,000. And that was how we initially built Accessibility Checker.
Interesting.
So that is an option. And the benefit of doing that is you don't give up any equity in your company. So we got $120,000, which for us, we were like, we can use that to do about 3 months of our team salaries, basically, right? Covering expenses. So we could literally say no to website projects for 3 months. And in that time, and that gave us our timeline, we have to have an MVP out, we have to have a website out, and all of those things. And you know, I think there are definite pros to that in that we didn't give up any equity, we got the money, but there are also risks to taking out a loan, which is that you now have to service debt. So we had to look at it and figure out what is the monthly payment on this going to look like. We had to feel comfortable. At the time, just myself and my husband were owners of the company. And so we knew we were also an LLC. So a lot of it was there, but we personally, like our social security numbers were backing that loan. So we had to know like what happens if all of our, like the product doesn't sell. What happens, you know, if all of our marketing, if we're going to stop building websites for 3 months, will we suddenly be able to start redoing them again when that 3 months ends? You know, what happens if that revenue goes away? We would personally be on the hook for paying back that loan. So there is definitely a risk associated with that you maybe don't have if you bring on investors, because investors are sort of taking on that risk.
Yeah.
True. So actually, I might skip to the last one briefly because I think that will be quicker. So validating and funding a product through pre-orders or platforms like Kickstarter. So that's quite an innovative way of getting funding, isn't it? Like getting people to pay for a product that doesn't exist or make a contribution or something like that. It's we actually did an episode with Kevin Geary late last year about Etch, which he's heavily doing pre-launch marketing for and has raised a lot of money through early deals when it's not going to exist for quite some time. And that's had huge interest. So I'd say you need to be kind of very good at marketing to do that, or you need to be a certain type of person. I don't think I could pull that off personally, but it's interesting hearing.
I think you have to have a list already. I think it's very difficult to do crowdfunding if you don't already have a really large email list or large social media followers. A long time ago, I had a business idea before I was doing WordPress websites. It was like a brick and mortar business idea. And I attempted, it was in the early days of crowdfunding. I attempted, and I got a few people who committed some money, but nothing like what I needed. And so it was a failed crowdfunding campaign for a brick and mortar business. Yeah. So like, I think that's something to keep in mind. If you don't have a very large follower growth or customer growth from a different product already, it might be challenging to fund a new product idea in this way.
I think so too. And the Kickstarter is at least safe. Crowdfunding can get like the percentage of interest that you have to pay can get really high in crowdfunding. So I know of people that started a business with a crowdfunding and then had to pay it back and were almost unable to do that. So that is not always the best way. It could be easy and you think, oh, a lot of people will help me, but you still have to pay that back. So if it's, so that could end up being expensive.
There's a newer thing that exists here in the US, and I don't know if this is a thing in Europe, but you can actually do equity crowdfunding in the US now, which is really interesting because it's a way to bring on micro investors and they get like one share or like very small amounts of ownership in the business. And we say one share out of like millions of shares, right? Like, so That's kind of an interesting thing that I've read a little bit about, but there's a lot of really weird rules about that because at least with the SEC in the United States, they have a lot on trying to make sure that you're not taking advantage of people who don't understand what they're doing with their money. And so they have a lot of rules around how you can even promote equity crowdfunding campaigns. Like you can't promote them in the same way that you do just like a donation-based crowdfunding campaign. But that is another kind of interesting mix between crowdfunding and then what I think we're going to talk about more, which is taking on actual investors.
Yeah, so Marieke, do you want to talk about the investment side of things?
Mm-hmm. I want to talk about that. What do you want to know?
I would expect so.
Yeah, so the VC, that's venture capital. Sometimes people talk about private equity. Those are all companies that have a lot of money and that their job is to invest that money in other companies. So that's also what we do at Emilia Capital. We do more things, but we invest, and our whole business model is aimed at making sure that you can sell those companies in a higher price range where you'll make profit, or, but this is different and this is very important, or a company becomes very profitable, and because we have a share, we'll get a part of the profit every year. So we talked with investors at Joost early on as well, but what all of them said is we want to sell the company within 5 years. And at that time, we were not thinking about selling, like in 2016 or something, 2015, we were not thinking about, I want to sell, but that's basically what a lot of investment companies would do. They would say, okay, we're going to work with you, make sure that this company becomes bigger and more valuable, and then we want to sell it because that's the way they make money. At Emilia Capital, we don't do it that way because I don't believe in, well, I do also believe in the fact that you can resell something, but I think it's also very profitable if a company becomes really profitable, because then we can get a part of the profit every year, and that could also be like a business model. But I'm not against private equity at all, but I would always advise people to ask, what is the goal of that company? What do they want out of it? And in many cases, it will be an exit. So it will be selling the company altogether. And that's something you either want or don't want or don't know yet. But if you take an investment, that's pretty much what it will end up being like.
Yeah, the other side of bringing on investors also is you could do what's called angel investors. Yes. Sometimes those are individuals, or they might be, there are angel networks where you go and it's a whole group of angels who get together and all agree, and they all invest at the same time through the angel network in the company. The same thing, they're usually looking for an exit at some point in time. Yeah. I think if we're talking the reality of WordPress products and the low valuations that they all probably have when they're first seeking this, the idea might be that you might have angels come in to do a smaller round in the beginning, and then those angels might exit either when you sell, or potentially if you grew your revenue and your customer base significantly where you could actually do like a true funding round, then they would exit on that funding round when you brought in a larger institutional investor.
Yeah, I think we are angels in a lot of cases as well. So an angel investor is usually someone who is very early on, could also be very involved, but some of them aren't. So you have all kinds of flavors, but also indeed could exit in an earlier stage if a proper investor comes along and takes up a bigger part of the pie. It all happens. Mm-hmm. Yes, all done that.
So it's interesting what you say about a lot of investors would expect an exit within a certain number of years, because I haven't done this directly, which we'll get to with story time, but In WordPress, I've seen quite a lot where that doesn't seem to happen. So there's you guys, and there's also the, or what's it called, Growth Accelerator Fund or something that Automotive do, which is basically they sell a proportion of the company, and they seem to continue owning them. So I sort of feel in the WordPress space that maybe there isn't always that pressure to sell.
Automotive is an exception, I think, that because that's a very strategic investor. He, Syed, of course, is very, very in the WordPress market. So I think he has a way of monetizing those products, which is amazing what he does with that. So I think he is a bit of an exception. If you look at, especially in the hosting business, you'll have a lot of VCs backing those companies. And some of them aren't being resold, or we don't see them being resold, because sometimes that does happen. So they go from VC to VC, but nothing really changes. But in the product, there are a lot of small products, and I see Syed coming in and buying a lot of them. There are some products that really have had some large amounts of investments, though, and they, I don't know if we don't know yet. So it's also I know a few that we invested in that are now being resold, or I can't talk about that. But that does happen, but not as much, I think, as in the other or any other in the world outside of WordPress.
Yeah, interesting. The thing, and I'm always unsure of, is to what extent the investor actually helps the company to grow, because sometimes they're completely remote, aren't they? And other times they're really hands-on. And I'm a particular fan of Dragon's Den / Shark Tank, in which you see them actively helping to provide strategic and often practical support to help that company to grow, which obviously benefits them. How common are the two different types, would you say?
Very common, both of them. I am one in either way. So I'm invested also with my time in some of our investments. We also invested in a fashion brand. Yes, not in the WordPress space. I don't do anything with them. So in the WordPress space, I think the most valuable what we can offer is our network. So we know a lot of people. It's very easy. So it's not very time consuming on our end. It's very easy to connect people to each other. That's I think a large benefit of having an investor like Syed Balki, who knows everybody. So that helps a lot. We also have knowledge and we can advise stuff. So that's something I think is very valuable as if you have such an investor. But I also do investments. I like to invest in companies that are founded by female people. Female, yeah, by women. And so in the WordPress space, it's pretty hard to find those. So that's why we have a fashion brand and we have a skincare brand. We have all kinds of other stuff, because I wanted to have more women in our investment portfolio.
Yeah. I would say, I think if you find an investor that's in WordPress space, then they're more likely to be involved.
Yeah.
But if you went to family and friends and did a friends and family round, which is very common, a lot of small businesses do that, they're probably not going to be involved at all, because they're not going to understand what you do. They're just going to believe in you and be willing to invest in your company. I think too, so we did an accelerator, and I talked to a lot of different larger like VC companies, and before we went to Emilia at that round, and a lot of them are not super involved with their investments. So I feel like outside the WordPress space, it's probably more common that investors might have like an annual shareholder meeting that they show up for. They might get quarterly reports or something like that, but they're not really going to be, Marieke looked at my blog posting strategy and gave me advice, right? And feedback. Yoast has looked at the code of our plugin and said, hey, they also contributed some dev hours, right? But I don't know that, I feel like that's above and beyond for an investor. I don't know if that is typical always.
What most investors do, and we always forget this, is that if they do want to participate, they want more shares. And we always forget that. We're new on this. We now know this.
You don't need more.
That is fair.
Yeah. And they'll get like
Or a
extra
salary.
shares for which
Yeah, it
makes
affects the
Yeah.
valuation because you're getting more value out of that investor. So it's right to give consultancy fee or extra equity. That does make sense.
Yes. So that's usually what some of them negotiate in. But I also see in Otterin, for example, which is a WordPress brand, but they're actually moving beyond WordPress. He has multiple investors, and I see others also being involved, and they're not in the WordPress world, but they are involved. You can also have people being involved in your numbers or your finance, and they don't necessarily have to be WordPress people. So I also
Technical.
I also see a lot of investors being like very involved in the financial business, and that could help as well, setting those up and making sure that all works correctly, and that you put your numbers in such a way that your valuation is higher, because that's like a whole magic thing in itself, I think.
We had a really good question, and I wonder if we should address that. Mahadi Ali had asked, what do investors look for in a WordPress plugin or theme business? And I wonder if you want to start by addressing that as an investor, Marieke.
So I would look at, do I see potential in growth here? Is it a new idea? Does it add something to plugins that are already in the WordPress ecosystem? Because that's really important. Is it something that adds something? Do I see people spending money on this? Because if you're going to invest it has to make money. That's just the way it is. And could we as investors help you to grow this? That's really important for us, because if we don't feel like, okay, we're going to be able to do anything, then it's just not fun. So we do have some brands that we don't do anything in, but that's not really fun. I just do that because I think it's very important to have more female founders. So I do feel something, but it's not that fun. It's just like, it's there. So I would like to feel or have the idea that I would also be able to contribute to the growth of that product. But that's for me. I don't know.
So some of the feedback that we got when we did an accelerator called Mass Challenge, MASS Challenge. It's a nonprofit zero equity accelerator. And they do virtual. They have some for people around the world. So I highly recommend that if you're interested in, learning about that. And then we pitched a lot when we were getting ready to do our initial raise round with investors. And some of the things that I learned is, you talk about, is it going to make money? Like, one of the things I think they care a lot about is who's on the team.
Yeah.
So for example, my team is myself, who has a lot of background in marketing. I'm an accessibility expert. Like I get that. My husband has a business degree and has run multi-million-dollar departments and understands budgets and HR and like all of the like operational things that literally make something happen. And then we brought on our partner, Steve, who was originally our developer, but he became a partner in the company, and he has the tech background. So we have a very balanced team. And I do know I saw other people going through the accelerator who was maybe just like, they were the tech people and they were building an app, but they didn't have any marketing expertise. They didn't have any of that. And they got a lot of questions, which is like, how are you going to do this? Right? So either you need to have a really strong founding team, or you need to have a really solid plan for employees. And that needs to be budgeted either into what you're already funding or like what you're asking for, to show that you are going to be able to make the business last long term.
You're completely correct. So I'm just looking at the question. what do I look for in a WordPress plugin? But you're right that the team is very important. And Joost will always say, I want to have a technical founder, but that's just because he is a technical founder. And I would always say, I want to have a founder that understands marketing. But so that's just, you look like, we'll seek for people that look like us. Like, okay, we understand those, but the team is really important. And I think that's the case for every investor. You want to talk to people, you want to understand how they work. And if you can work with them, that's really important as well. Yeah.
The other thing I think that is huge if you're looking to go for investment is, do you already have customers and what is your MMR currently? So I talked to some people who they're like, we really love this idea. Come back when you have at least 10K in monthly recurring revenue from your product, right? There are some firms that won't invest in anyone that is below that. There are other companies that are really open to, this is an idea, we have 0 customers. but it's a very different type of investor that is, willing to do that. And if you are doing like looking for serious funding, you need to figure out who to target based upon what your current customer and revenue from your product is, because they don't care about, I mean, we were like, oh, we have 700K in service revenue. And they're all like, yeah, we don't care.
No, I understand.
That does not apply to investing in your product.
It's also really hard to establish a value or evaluation of a company that doesn't sell anything yet. We've also done this. We also have shares in companies that don't make any money. I wouldn't necessarily do that again, because it's very, very hard, and you really don't know. When I first started out as an investor, I always thought, oh, this is a good idea, and this is a good idea. I thought everything was a good idea. And now I think, well, a good idea doesn't necessarily translate into a good business. That's just not what it is. It's hard to get that business up and running.
Yeah, that's true. And of course, the subject of this episode of WP Product Talk is how to fund your next product. So that implies that you haven't got revenue yet for that particular use case. So maybe, it sounds like maybe the best time to get investment is not before you start, potentially, unless you've got a really great track record, like say Kevin Geary with Etch or something, because he's a known person that can build successful products. Maybe that could have been a candidate. But if it's your first product, then maybe investment isn't the best first step. What would you say?
I wouldn't. I think it would be really hard. I think you would have to give up a lot of your equity because your valuation is really, really low. So unless it's someone that you really think, I need that person to get me, but then you'll actually have a partner. That's just a partner if you have someone who does that with you. Yeah.
Which is a valid option as well, actually, partnering with somebody and they get equity. Yeah. So if you're a sole developer, for example, you need a marketer, then you could actually go into business with a marketer. Yeah. But that's not receiving money, is it? That's receiving their time.
Yeah. But that said, I think if you're thinking about funding, and, we talked about pros and cons of loans versus bringing in an investor, giving up equity or not, a thought that I always had, because we've had people be like, why did you offer to let your employee become a partner? Right? Like, or why did we go out and get investment, instead of just taking out another loan? But for me, I'm like, well, sure, I could own 100% of something very small, or I could own less than 100% of something that is quite big. And guess which one makes more money? So giving up equity is not always a bad thing. And I think there can be some great value that you get from doing that. Katie, so we've talked a bunch about fundraising, and you're one of the people who hasn't. You've bootstrapped. I'm wondering if you want to transition a little bit to like personal stories and talk about your experience, how you fund new products when you're going to add them, because you also have multiple products in your portfolio.
Yeah, and actually, maybe we could get to Zach's question as part of that. So, Zach has said, if you already have revenue for existing products, what about seeking collateral in the existing business when funding a new business? Actually, that's more of a question for Marieke, isn't it? Before we get to story time, thinking about it. So, would you do that? It's an existing company that wants a new product funding. Would you say, well, I want a percentage of your existing business?
Yeah, I wouldn't do that anymore, but we did that with Equalize Digital. But I wouldn't do that anymore. I would say, but it's really hard. So I see a lot of companies. I would want to have a share in the product, because that's going to make money in the end, or that's the thing you want to have money. And so if a company has two things, I would now say, okay, we're going to invest only in the part that's the product part. So that means that you kind of have to split your company if you have a consultancy.
It means you have two different legal entities now, different bank accounts, different things, if that's the idea.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah.
Okay, which you may or may not want to do.
No.
So,
yeah, complexity as well.
Yeah.
So, yeah, like Amber said, I've never taken any kind of funding or financial support, loans, nothing. We've always been bootstrapped. And so I'll talk a bit about how we've done that. We, first of all, as many people who get into WordPress products, started off by doing websites for clients. So we had an agency, which was my husband and myself owning it. And we used freelancers at that time for extra capacity for development and things. So when we decided to start selling products, my husband, Andy, as the technical lead, just stepped away from the client side of things while he built our first plugin. And I continued doing all of the client management and working with the freelancers, and so that we still had some revenue going. And also with client work, if you've done it right, then you should have some recurring revenue, such as hosting and maintenance agreements, so that even when you don't have new products, you should have some revenue from clients coming in. And that takes literally years to drop off. We still have revenue from clients, and we haven't taken on a new project since 2016. So they take a long time to go. So ours was initially funded by the client business, which was continuing to pay the bills while we started selling plugins. And we started off with intentionally small products as well that met a specific need, like adding a particular feature to WooCommerce or something like that. So that way it meant that the development costs, which we were doing in-house with our own resources anyway, were low. There was an opportunity cost, because obviously Andy could have been doing client websites. But so financially it was fine. And it was helpful that we had that existing setup. But I think that a lot of people wanting to start in WordPress products have a similar setup. And even if they're an individual, a freelance developer or something, like I say, they could outsource some of the work. They might have some existing hosting revenue to tide them over for a bit. So you don't have to, if you're building small products particularly, you don't necessarily need funding. And then as you've got more products, obviously you've got revenue, so that you can maybe spend a bit less time developing an existing product while you're building a new one. So that's how we've always done it at Barn 2, and it's still 50-50 with my husband and myself. But it's a weird time, because he left the company in mid last year, and he still owns half of it. So I'm kind of waiting to see what he decides to do. At the time, we decided that he would keep his money in Barn 2, but it's possible that we would be, seeking investment or selling equity or something in the future if he decides, say, to start a completely different venture in a new area or something. So maybe I will learn more about this in the future. But for now, we've always been self-funded. My one doubt, though, is how much faster we could have grown if we'd got help from outside. And like now, I feel pretty well connected, that I can make the most of the WordPress community and get advantages from that, for example. But at the time, I couldn't. So maybe if I had been a bit more open at the beginning, or when we had that, say, 10 grand a month revenue or something, maybe we could have grown quicker. And I did actually have an offer in 2019, I think, from the WP Beginner Accelerator Fund, which I decided not to go ahead with. And I never know if that was the right decision or not.
Katie, if somebody came up to you and said, I'll give you $1 million today for some percent, we don't have to talk about the percent. Do you know what you would do with that money?
That's the thing. It wouldn't really be for the money. I would probably take it out of the company and invest it somewhere else, stocks and shares. I don't know, because the company doesn't need more money. The company's doing well. For example, you probably know that we're starting to build Shopify apps, and we're funding that just from our existing revenue. So 2 of my existing developers, I've moved on to Shopify. So we don't really need money to grow the company unless it's a different scale.
Yeah.
But if you would get an investor, that money would go to you and not in the company. So if you sell shares, that money would go to you.
Yeah, true. So and then we
you
could
don't have
invest
to
it.
reinvest it in the company.
No.
So yeah, that's the thing. I mean, normally though, when we're thinking about like getting an investor, it's to further company growth. But if your company doesn't need that, right, then that's the answer. Could you go faster? Of course you could, right? If you got extra money, you could build 8 Shopify products next month. I don't know, right?
True. Hire more developers. Yeah.
But if you don't want that, then there's no reason to do it. Right.
Yeah, that's the thing. For me, it's a lifestyle decision as well, because I haven't built the structure to have more managers and product managers and so on. If I had an extra 4 developers, that would be a lot more work for me. And I'd need to create another tier of product management and so on, which I don't necessarily want. So yeah, I suppose that's not really seeking funding. It's more selling part of your company.
Yeah, the selling part of your company. That's something you could do. Yeah. Then you have a lot of money, and you can add a part to your house, or
or Andy could sell his, right?
That's what it would be.
Oh, I don't want to think about it.
So I want to keep what I'm doing for the foreseeable, but I've got this interesting new situation that my husband owns half the company and isn't involved. So he could make the decision at some point. So I'm starting to think, oh, what would I do if that happened? Because I'd still be running the company. So interesting. Anyway, so
I think it's always interesting when I think about the decisions that we've made with our funding. So first, taking out the loan, which I teased this a little bit earlier. Our interest rate is real high right now because it's a multiple of the federal interest rate, which is quite high. But we've had conversations because we had the cash that we could have just paid off what was left on the loan. I think we have about half of it left at this point. But then we decided that we'd rather keep that cash in the business to reinvest, and it didn't make sense. Like, let's just keep paying the monthly payment and be okay with the fact that there's an interest rate. Like, it made more sense to put that money into active development than just paying off debt. But like thinking about that, the fundraising round that we did with Emilia, like all of that has 100% sped us up and allowed us to get. So before we brought on investors, we had done the initial loan, and that allowed us to do the initial development of the product, which Steve's in the chat. He can correct me if I'm wrong. I'm getting years mixed up now, but I'm pretty sure we released that in December of 2020, January 2021. And for most of 2021, I think we didn't do a lot on the product at all because we had, I don't know, 2 people who maybe bought it right away because we love them and they're amazing. And then like hardly anyone. And so we had to go back to what was paying our bills, which was customer work. And so we didn't do very much on it. And then it started to grow and it started to build a little bit of revenue. But we were like, we still aren't able to focus on this full time. So we said, okay, we want more money to invest in marketing. We want to be able to hire a full-time developer just to work on this product, not to have to do client work. And that's what led us to decide to take out, like to go get investors and to trade equity for money. And where we are now, we were so excited. Like I was looking at it last year, the plugin funds a full-time developer, which in the beginning it didn't. And so we've been able to grow the revenue of that enough to cover that, plus the time that other people on our team spend on it as well, our marketing person, myself, my partners. So I think, there is definitely, there can be huge benefits with taking out loans or getting investors that allow you to move faster and get out more of the features that you want or do more marketing. And I just think, like, in general, you have to be aware though of what your end goals are, because for us, we're not really right now looking for just kind of like a lifestyle business. To be totally honest, my husband and I had that with our marketing agency. Like, we lived in a travel trailer and traveled around for 2 years. Like, we had the lifestyle, but we want something that is going to deliver more in the long run. We have a goal of selling and making a lot of money when we sell. We've got 4 kids we got to put through college, right? Like, and so I think if you're a product owner or founder, those are the kinds of long-term things you have to think about. And that can help shape these decisions on how you fund your product and how fast you want your product to grow.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah. So we've just had a question. So should I focus on freemium or premium models when looking for funding? Marieke, do you have a preference in that?
As an investor, as an open source advocate, I
as an investor,
they're not the same.
In the WordPress space, I really believe in freemium but then the free product needs to be good as well. So don't create something that doesn't add any value. And as a WordPress community member, I really believe in freemium, but then the same. So make sure that the free version does something for users as well. So it's not just an upsell thing. I think within WordPress, you'll have the biggest chance of growing if you do a freemium model. But I haven't done anything else, so I'm not sure. Maybe it is possible, but then you need to do a lot of marketing, which you need to do anyway. But so I'm a freemium believer.
I will say, outside of WordPress, there were a lot of investors we talked to who dismissed us because, 1, GPL, 2, WordPress open source. And they were basically like, this is not a good investment because anyone can take your stuff.
Yeah, but that's also the reason why when it's only, if you have only a premium product, the chances that and it is open source, then the chances that someone would just copy it and offer it for free in the repository is very big. So that's always the trade-off, that I think people they will pay for something if it adds value. But if you're just taking advantage of the ecosystem, that will not pay off well. But I just really believe in open source. But a lot of investors do not. They don't understand the GPL. And to be really honest, the current atmosphere and the things that are going on in WordPress aren't good for investors. This is not a good situation we're in, with a lot of drama, which also investors know, because investors are bankers are the most chattiest people. We had a banker helping us when we sold Joost, and we still talk to him. He's a Dutch guy, and Joost takes him to football matches and stuff. And he always has things to tell us about, that one is looking for funding, and that host is he knows everything. So these people also know, okay, it's like a little weird in the WordPress world, which is not good for investments. That's just, that's
a good point. That not just about the current climate, but generally people outside of the WordPress world, they may be used to investing in apps or something like that. Prejudice, I would actually say, about GPL and open source. They can't imagine how you could run a profitable, stable business without, say, intellectual property protection and patents and all of that kind of thing. But actually, obviously, there are many hugely successful companies within WordPress, despite their software not being protected in that way. It's all about positioning and reputation and all those things, which are maybe harder to measure. But then why would you want to get investment from a non-WordPress investor anyway? Because it's within the industry, you've got that more understanding. Hopefully the WordPress
money is
investors,
money.
I suppose, but you get less help from them, don't you? They don't have those contacts, which, as Marieke said earlier, it's not a lot of work for you to be connecting people because you're so well connected yourself. So for me, I think it would be a no-brainer to stick within WordPress, but I'm sure there's another side.
Perhaps it would be good for our ecosystem to have more people wanting to invest, because that would just mean that prices would go up. And so for the entire ecosystem, it would be good. I know when we saw Joost, we talked to a Dutch non-WordPress investment company, and they asked me, but you should have asked €1 for all of the free installs. And I was like, it doesn't work like that. And he was just, no, you should just ask for €1. People will pay €1. And they didn't understand why we didn't have email addresses of our free users. We didn't. But that doesn't make sense to them because you're offering a free product. So it's a lot of explaining. But I think for the maturity of WordPress, it would be good if more investors would come in and invest in a way that is not that is sustainable. So not to eagerly and to try to maximize profit quickly, but in a sustainable way. It would help products to grow.
Yeah, that's true. And it's a shame that multiples on WordPress company valuations are typically lower than some other tech industries, aren't they? So it would be nice to see WordPress getting more recognition in that sense.
We're the biggest CMS out there. So that would be honest. Yeah, I think so too. Yeah.
So before we move on to best advice, we've got a question from Zach. How about the e-commerce structure? Like, is there a difference as an investor when considering Woo EDD Freemium? So I'm guessing that's about how you are selling your products. Would you look at that as a factor?
I don't know enough about Freemium. I don't think that Woo or EDD would make any difference.
So Freemium would probably make a difference, I think, because Freemium takes a larger percentage of your sales.
Yeah.
So it's going to make your profits lower, which therefore is going to make the value of your company lower if you use Freemium. Yeah. Sad truth.
But at the same time, if you could also exit Freemium and make your profit bigger.
Yeah.
That would be
but that might be a condition, right? We'll invest, but in the first month, we're going to change how you're selling so that you can have more profit or something.
Yeah, I've seen that happen. Yeah. So that then that's a way that the investor can win very quickly. So maybe it's good if you use Freemium, because then you can say, I can switch to WooCommerce and increase my profits by 7% or whatever it averages at.
If I see quick wins, I really get excited. So if I see like people that have a free product and are not upselling the way I would upsell, that would mean like, okay, I can, and you have a lot of free installs that could instantly up your profit. Also, people that, I don't know if you do that, but we used to do a lot of abandoned cart emails. We actually emailed those people personally. One of our employees would do that. That would make a lot of difference. If people don't do that, that could make like instantly more money.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. I think for me, rather than it being about the platform, it's about your business model, like your pricing structure. So, for example, surely a business would be more valuable for investors if it had renewals, if it had recurring payments, if it had a SaaS model so that when somebody cancels, they don't use the product anymore. Whereas with most plugins and themes, if you cancel, you just don't get updates, but you can keep using it. So I would suspect that the valuation is partly dependent on how secure that revenue model is.
So the MRR and your churn or your retention, those are the things that we will look into first, and then the percentage new installs, because if that's growing and your churn is low and your MRR is growing, but your MRR will grow even if you just keep up with all of the customers you already have. But you also want that percentage of new customers to grow. Yeah.
Yeah. Maddie says, give a try to lemon squeezy. So that's an alternative to Freemium, I suppose. Yeah. So let's move on. We've going quite a long time, which is interesting because there's a lot to talk about. So let's talk about our best advice, our one piece of advice for new WordPress product owners thinking of how to fund their product. So mine would be to think flexibly at the different stages of the life cycle of your company. At the beginning, think creatively. Is there any way you can do it off your own back and stay bootstrapped initially until you can prove that value? If not, maybe you do need to get a loan or something, but just think about the future implications of that and servicing the debt. Or if you've already got some sort of track record, maybe it is time to get investment straight away. So my advice is to be flexible based on your situation. What about you, Marieke?
I agree with you. I would, and I'm an investor, but I would think twice before giving up equity. So I wouldn't do that too early on, except if you really think that this company or person is going to help you grow. But otherwise, be hesitant to take on equity if you don't need to, because then it will just remain your company, which is better in many ways. Yeah.
Did not expect you to say that.
Yeah, that's just no, but I do believe, but I think for most companies, so it almost feels like that you're only successful if you have had funding. So I was talking to someone from the Netherlands, also in the WordPress business, and he has just a really high recurring revenue every year, really, really high. And he said, but nobody knows it because I didn't have any funding and he didn't feel successful. And I was like, you're very successful because you built like a very, very highly profitable business. And I think that's really an accomplishment. And I don't feel like you should have that funding is part of your success. You could have a little marketing value out of it. And I like to fund WordPress companies, but if it's not necessary, then you should not do it. And you can be successful bootstrapped as well. Yeah.
Yeah. So my advice, which I think is a great tailor into yours, Marieke, is you have to really know your numbers. So if you don't have a good accounting platform, if you don't have a good way of reporting and forecasting out and looking ahead, that is probably the number one place you have to start, because that's what's going to help you figure out how you're going to fund your product, whether you're going to be able to bootstrap it, whether you want to take out a loan and how much, or bring in investors and for how much. So you really need to have a solid understanding of your numbers.
And I like the accelerated program you mentioned. Mm-hmm. Doing something like that, or I do some business consulting, not that much, but I'm also looking at the numbers and looking at how I could help this company grow, but we're not taking equity. This man just pays me for my services, which can help a lot as well. And it's like a good step if that could be something to help you get started as well, to find someone or mentor to help you grow that first part.
Yep. Well, I feel like that is about our time for today. Do you want to wrap us up, Katie?
Yeah, so I think that's been a really good discussion because it's a complex area and I think we've covered it pretty comprehensively. So thank you so much for joining us, Marieke. We really appreciate you coming on and sharing your experience in this area. Where can people find you online?
Oh, wow. Yeah, how can you find me online? I'm on the post status Slack. I'm still I don't do Twitter anymore, and I'm not on Blue Sky anymore, or yet, and I don't do Facebook anymore. I'm really hard to find. You can find me on the post status. Like, I'm not in the WordPress Slack either anymore. Yeah, the WordPress NL Slack, I'm still there.
Okay, well, if people are interested in funding for their next product, where can they find Emilia Capital?
Oh, you can find Emilia Capital on our website, which is emilia.capital, I think. Yeah, and you can also take a look at progressplanner.com, which is our latest product. And if you really want to find me, you could just Google me. I'm very well optimized. You find me there.
I would hope so. Yes.
Yes, as one would expect from a founder of an SEO company.
That's all.
So thank you so much. For everyone who's watching next week, do not miss it. Our co-hosts, Matt and Zach, will be on, and they will be discussing the next step in the product journey, which is creating a product's brand and logo. So tune in for that next week at the same time.
So special thanks to Post Status for being our green room. And if you're enjoying these shows, then do us a favor and hit like, subscribe, share it with your friend, reference this show in your newsletters, and don't forget to tune in next week. Bye.